Your Steam library is not actually yours at all. You don't really own any of those games you purchased on Steam, you just bought a subscription to access them. And that's just not good enough for a consumer union in France, who have just won a court battle to strip Steam's rights over your purchases, meaning you can even resell all those old games of yours.
Yay.
Here to discuss it with me is Mr. Gareth Evans, and my name is Henry Cooper.
How are you doing all?
I am tired, but it seems like the French aren't, and they are fighting the good fight for us as consumers to stop the evil corporations from doing what evil corporations do.
Well, I'm on France's side already.
Well, that's perhaps a bit harsh. The District Court of Paris in France, in case you didn't know where that was, has ruled that Steam's products are digital licenses, although Steam have always argued that they are subscriptions. So when you buy a game on Steam, you don't own it, it's not a good, you own a subscription to use that product when you want. So it's a bit weird, almost a loophole, but kind of
It is. It's the way of them making sure that you don't own the rights to anything after you part with your money. Give us your 60 quid and you get this subscription from our platform. Yeah, all right, Steam. Yeah, it's only because we've got no other options.
So the District Court of Paris have said, nope, you're a digital license, so you should be following the rest of the European trade laws just like everybody else. You should be doing the same stuff, same regulations and all that.
Yeah, so that means that you do own this thing now, right? You got a license for it, which means you own it, which might mean that you get the right to resell it. That's what it's all.
Yeah, among other things.
That's the tipping point, right?
A license to kill. Who needs that when you can get a license to game, baby? So the court has ruled that Valve will have to, among other things, allow users to resell games on Steam, which is the biggest one. We'll kind of circle back to that. And that's the focal point of all this. They'll have to reimburse any store currency the user has on the platform if they then suspend their account and go do something else. They have to take responsibility for any harm suffered by the user, which is kind of an interesting one. They will diminish the rights to user-generated content, so that includes mods or any community-driven content and community boards and all that sort of stuff. And in total, there are 14 clauses that the courts found that Valve did not have the rights to claim that they were claiming. So Valve are doing stuff that legally they weren't actually entitled to.
Yeah, and this is EU law as well, so this could have implications for throughout Europe. France have deemed that they're contravening EU law. Yeah. Whatever happens in France potentially can happen all across Europe.
Although this is not going to matter to us really for much longer, right? In a couple of weeks, it all goes to the government.
Get it done quick, anyway. France. Let's go. Chop, chop.
So who's involved here? So Valve. Everyone knows Valve. They make Steam, but excuse my terrible French accent here. Union Fédérale des Consommateurs. Union Fédérale Consommateurs.
Fédérale des Consommateurs.
Well, I think Fédérale is a bit Spanish. Fédérale. Well, either way.
Fédérale des Consommateurs, right?
In the old Queen's English, that's the Federal Union of Consumers, which is much more palatable to my delicate tongue.
Sack this discussion. We'll just spend a whole quarter of an hour talking in French accents. That'll be cool.
But anyway, so the Federal Union of Consumers has contested Valve's assertions about being a subscription, which is called the Steam Subscriber Agreement. Valve says that users don't purchase any products, they purchase a subscription to use it, and that you don't actually own anything on Steam. But now the courts have said that Valve are violating EU law.
Stop! You violated the law. Pay the court a fine or serve your sentence.
Which dictates that goods must be able to be resold without the original seller's permission. And this is all part of the free movement of goods within the Union, which is a big thing that the European Union is all about. You can buy stuff, you can resell it, and it doesn't matter who sold it to you, they no longer have any power over it. And Steam doesn't class their products as goods, they class what they sell you as a service, part of the whole games as a service thing, and you are buying a subscription, as we keep hammering home, because that's what Steam believe, but apparently it's not the case anymore, according to the French laws.
It's a court ruling now. Yeah. I mean, they have to appeal it if they want to go against it, but it's been ruled in favour of us, really, essentially, because we get the rights to, or the French Steam users at the very least get the rights to their digital Steam libraries, which is huge. You know, there's implications all over the place. Ever since digital distribution came to the forefront of the industry, it's been a huge boon for the games industry as a whole, because obviously you can't resell sell a digital product. So all sales of a game digitally has to be a new game. So they've made so much more money off these because you don't have manufacturing costs, physical manufacturing costs like you do when you're selling physical. Obviously, you can't sell digital used games, so they've just made so much more money off these digital games since digital distribution came to the forefront. But now that is all in question, and it has severe implications, not just for us as gamers who might want to resell our games, but also for publishers, developers, for people who make all this money off games and all this additional money off not being allowed to resell games. It's scary how that might pan out for a lot of people.
And naturally, as is their right, Valve disagree with everything they've said, and they've come out and their response is, we disagree with the decision of the Paris Court of First Instance and will appeal it. The decision will have no effect on Steam while the case is on appeal. Nothing's going to happen for the next 3 months, and that's the time in which Valve will be able to appeal it. But if Valve loses and they fail to submit to any of these changes, it's going to mean real financial burden on them, because they will be forced to pay a fine of up to 3,000 euros per day for 6 months if they don't change their systems to meet the laws.
Yeah, well, I mean, how much is that for how many days in 6 months? And that's a lot for 6 months. I mean, they could be looking at a fine of up to €500,000 after 6 months. Like if it's 300 euros per day, that's a lot of money. They don't want to be paying out €500,000, but they're gonna have to either put a good appeal together or face that. Right.
And they're probably going to be getting help with that appeal from the Interactive Software Federation of Europe, who also disagrees with the court's ruling. And they are basically the European version of the ESA, who we've been covering a bit recently. They're the big lobby groups who are represented by the big publishers and the big corporations, all of the big ones who are getting all the money and usually doing all the bad things, but they're not all terrible. But so the ISFE is made up of the likes of Activision and EA and Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, Take-Two and Ubisoft, among a smattering of others. And their CEO Simon Little says, this French ruling flies in the face of established EU law which recognises the need to protect digital downloads from the ease of reproduction allowed by the internet. So that's essentially saying you shouldn't be able to resell digital goods because they can be copied and duplicated, i.e. pirated, and then sold for profit, and the original proprietor won't get anything for it. And it's so easy because it's digital and you don't have to, as you say, there's no manufacturing, you don't have to print anything, you just do some stuff on your computer. Far from supporting gamers, this ruling, if it stands, would dramatically and negatively impact investment in the creation, production and publication of not just video games, but of the entire output of the digital entertainment sector in Europe. If Europe's creators cannot protect their investment and their intellectual property, the impact on both industry and consumers will be disastrous.
So the defense of this is essentially our games will be pirated more. I mean, how is that a defense? Piracy is already a thing. Piracy is already pretty big. I don't see this affecting piracy in any way. Piracy is always going to be there, always has been there, no matter how much DRM Steam likes to throw, or like the Denuvos of this world are out there, but they still get cracked. There's piracy out there, right? Allowing users to resell their digital products, which they should have the right to according to French interpretation of EU law, their interpretation of what a good is, or what, like, the terminology or whatever. According to that, that's going to increase piracy. How does that work? I can't see that at all. I mean, all that's going to happen is Steam are going to facilitate, if they forced to, like in 6 months time or 3 months time or whatever, Steam are going to have to facilitate the sale of used games. That's not going to increase piracy one bit, and that's just such a bad defense. They're trying to change the subject and kind of deflect the issue, which is that users should have the right to resell their games because they own them, right? Unlike what Steam are trying to tell us, which is we just have the subscription for it, which is, according to French lawmakers now, apparently is bullshit. So it's interesting. It's obviously there's a lot of terminology involved. There's a lot of interpreting law and stuff. It's not even a good defense at all saying that it'll increase piracy, because if you take 2 seconds to think about it, it's not going to affect the piracy one bit, because piracy has always been there.
One thing that I think will be interesting that will probably come out over the coming days will be any of these Europe's creators and people who are making games and selling games in Europe. I wonder what they think about it, because obviously it will be their products that will be affected and their games that may or may not end up being resold. How do they feel? Because the ISFE are kind of pitting it as the consumers versus the creators, which I think is an argument that we don't want to be having, but they're going to try and put it like that.
Well, one thing's for sure, they stand to lose a lot of revenue. You think about the repercussions for especially single player games, one and done campaign type games. Those those are going to be the first games to be sold. Once you complete it, you're going to sell it. Whereas games as a service type games are going to be the ones who are going to retain their value a little bit more. Because to the end consumer, those type of games can be of value to you like years down the road. We've just learned that Destiny 2 are now going to be supporting the game for another 5 years.
Yeah.
So gamers are much less likely to sell those games where they could be playing for a solid 5 years with new content all the time. So, I mean, repercussions for the indie gaming industry. I mean, digital distribution has seen a huge rise in independent games and publishers because of the ease of publishing games, right? So all these like small size independent games developers and publishers might just see their games get, prices tank in the marketplace because people play their game, want one and done, sell it on, and they just might not be as much profit or revenue in the long run for them. So it could be devastating for a lot of people.
And this whole thing hinges around and fixes around the concept of what's known as exhaustion doctrine in EU copyright law. And that's the concept where once a product is sold, the copyright holder or the patent holder, which will usually be the seller, they no longer have any rights to it. The person who owns the copyright, they don't have any rights to what is done with that product. So the purchaser can keep it forever and ever. They can put it on a shelf, they can destroy it, they can take it to bed with them and do things there, or they can resell it. And the idea is that all of this principle should be applied to these digital products as well. Obviously, you might not be able to take it to bed with you, but hey, I'm sure you can figure it out. Gamers are clever.
But it might not all be bad for developers and Steam and publishers or whatever. We don't know for certain what the prices of resale. Maybe Steam will dictate. I mean, we don't know whether users are going to be able to dictate the prices of resale games. And also, there's also an upcoming digital games storefront called Robot Cash, which is promising to allow you to resell your games, but they're only allowing you to make 25% of the resale value. So as a user, you'll only see 25% of the sale value go into your account, with 5% going to Robot Cash and 70% going back to the publishers. This ruling says that, yes, Steam has to resell games, but it doesn't say how much profit that the users are allowed to make off it. Because if Steam has to facilitate these sales of used games, then it might be Steam's rules, our way or the highway. And
it could be a win for Steam if they interpret it right and can kind of rig the system in a certain way so that they get all the money from, the real sale. Well, not all the money, but they get a decent portion of the sales of new games when they're released on their store, but they can also rig the game so that they get a bit of a back end from the resale as well as the user, because it's still classed as you reselling it, but through their systems they can probably be like, well, we're going to get a bit of it. Like when you take a hard copy physical game into a game shop, they'll take a premium from it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, where there's money to be made, they'll always take their cut. I mean, it will mean that maybe they take a smaller cut because they're selling a used game than a new game, because new digital sales, they make so much money off that. Maybe those days are numbered. But the good thing for us, if there is like a bonus good thing, is that I reckon it'll force games developers or publishers to finish their games before they release them. Because if you think about games like Anthem and Fallout 76 and all those games that got launched in shit states, they'd be sold as used copies faster than anything, which would completely tank new game sales because everyone would buy them up sold and then they'd resell them on again. They're not seeing a lot of profit at all off these games that aren't finished. Like Anthem would be a total shit show.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't sell much anyway, probably, but they'd have sold even less if this was the case, if people were selling the games.
If all this does go through, who would even buy a brand new game? Because when it comes to physical, if you're buying a used game, the disc itself is going to have been worn at least a little bit. Even if it's in tip-top condition, it's still being used and it's going to be in less good condition than it would in a sealed box. Digital things, they're not going to degrade.
Exactly.
So what are you losing or risking by buying a used one?
If you're buying a used copy through Steam, if they allow it, then you won't be buying the CD key. So hopefully the games will just transfer from one account to another. You won't need the CD key, which might, muddy the waters if people resell the CD key or whatever a few times over. So that might be a problem. And also that when you sell a game, you might only get a small amount back and it might only go into your Steam wallet rather than actual funds that you can cash out. So there's another caveat there too.
That's probably how they'll do it. They'll just give you a voucher type thing that you can then use to buy a new game.
But if you think you've got how many hundreds of Steam games just sitting there, and obviously they're not worth a lot because they might be really old games, but if you could take $1 for each of them, I mean, that's it. It's a few $100s right there that games should never play again. Even you might as well take the money.
But no matter where you stand on this, it's still great news because it's going to force Steam to do something that's going to force them to be better, which again, no matter what you feel about the Epic Games Store, if Steam want to survive, they'll have to step up what they're doing and become a better service for everyone, which is only a win for us as consumers. But that's all we have to say on the matter. Make sure you let us know down in the comments. Do you side with Valve? Do you think, why should people be able to resell their games? Valve, sell them to us. They should just have everything. Or are you on the side of the Union Fédérale des Consommateurs? I'm going to say that's how I pronounce it. And let me know what you think of my amazing French pronunciation. Anyway,
it sucks.
Correct me how to say it. Go on over to patreon.com/prettygoodgaming to support the content we make. Hit that subscribe button and the bell button. I've been Henry. He's been Gaz. We'll see you next time. Bye for now. Au revoir.